In just 23 days, a labor dispute at one Amazon warehouse in Queens became the most consequential union battle in American history. Jeff Bezos, the world's second-richest man worth $171 billion, deployed every union-busting weapon in corporate America's arsenal against 3,847 warehouse workers who dared to organize. But he made one fatal miscalculation. Their mayor was Zohran Mamdani, a Democratic socialist who understood that when billionaires attack working families, municipal government must choose sides. What began as routine labor organizing became a direct confrontation between the world's most powerful CEO and America's most progressive mayor, and only one would emerge victorious. February 14, 2026, Amazon Fulfillment Center, JFK 8 in Staten Island, buzzed with pre-dawn activity as thousands of workers began their Valentine's Day shifts. But beneath the warehouse's industrial efficiency, a revolution was brewing that would shake corporate America to its core. Christian Smalls, the 33-year-old former Amazon employee who'd become America's most effective labor organizer, stood outside the facility's main entrance with a clipboard and determination that had already terrified Jeff Bezos. Smalls had successfully organized Amazon's first warehouse union at JFK 8 in 2022, but the company had fought the victory through 4 years of legal challenges, delays, and intimidation tactics. Now, with Zohran Mamdani as mayor, Smalls was organizing something unprecedented, a coordinated strike across all 5 Amazon facilities in New York City, representing over 15,000 workers demanding recognition of their union, living wages, and safe working conditions. Today, we're not just fighting Amazon, Smalls announced to the growing crowd of workers, union organizers, and local media. We're fighting for every working family in America who's been told they don't deserve dignity on the job. The timing was strategic and symbolic. Valentine's Day represented love, but Amazon workers knew the company loved profits more than people. The holiday's online shopping surge would make any work stoppage maximally damaging to Amazon's operations and stock price. Inside the warehouse, supervisors were already implementing contingency plans developed by Amazon's anti-union consultants. The company had spent $14.2 million annually on union-busting firms that specialized in worker intimidation, misinformation campaigns, and legal obstruction of organizing efforts. But Amazon faced an unprecedented challenge. For the first time in company history, they were fighting organized workers who had municipal government support rather than opposition. At 7:30 a.m., Mayor Zohran Mamdani arrived at JFK 8 in his official car, flanked by Deputy Mayor Maria Torres Springer and a team of labor lawyers. His presence sent a clear message. New York City government supported workers' right to organize against corporate exploitation. Amazon workers are New York workers, Mamdani declared to assembled reporters. When they fight for dignity and fair wages, they fight for every working family in our city. Municipal government will not be neutral when billionaires attack our neighbors. The statement was unprecedented. Mayors traditionally maintained neutrality in private sector labor disputes, but Mamdani was explicitly taking sides with workers against one of the world's most powerful corporations. Amazon's corporate response was swift and threatening. Within 2 hours of Mamdani's statement, the company's government relations team issued a thinly veiled ultimatum. Amazon's continued investment in New York City depends on a business-friendly environment that respects legal employment relationships. The corporate blackmail was obvious. Amazon employed over 25,000 people across New York City, leased millions of square feet of warehouse and office space, and generated billions in economic activity. The company was betting that economic pressure would force Mamdani to abandon worker support in favor of corporate appeasement. They had fundamentally misunderstood the mayor they were threatening. At 2 p.m., Mamdani held an emergency press conference at City Hall that would escalate the conflict beyond anything Amazon's executives had anticipated. Jeff Bezos believes his wealth entitles him to exploit workers and intimidate elected officials. Mamdani began, his voice carrying the moral authority that had made him a national political figure. He's about to learn that New York City doesn't bow to billionaire bullying. Mamdani announced a comprehensive municipal response to Amazon's union busting, immediate suspension of all city contracts with Amazon Web Services, investigation of workplace safety violations at Amazon facilities, and full legal support for workers facing company retaliation. When corporations threaten our workers, they threaten our democracy, Mamdani declared. Municipal government has an obligation to protect working families from corporate abuse, regardless of how wealthy the abusers might be. The announcement sent shockwaves through corporate America. Mamdani wasn't just supporting workers, he was using municipal authority to pressure one of the world's largest corporations. The implications terrified every CEO who depended on government neutrality during labor disputes. Amazon's stock price dropped 3.2% in after-hours trading as investors recognized the unprecedented nature of Mamdani's intervention. For the first time, a major corporation faced coordinated opposition from both organized workers and municipal government. That evening, Jeff Bezos convened an emergency video conference with Amazon's senior executive team, labor relations specialists, and crisis management consultants. The 60-year-old founder had built his empire by crushing worker organizing before it could threaten corporate profits. But Mamdani's intervention created an entirely new challenge. "Explain to me how a small city mayor thinks he can fight Amazon," Bezos demanded, his voice carrying the frustration of someone accustomed to getting his way through wealth and market power. Amazon's head of government relations, Jay Carney, outlined the company's standard playbook: economic pressure, political lobbying, media manipulation, and legal challenges. But every strategy faced complications from Mamdani's support. "The mayor's intervention changes our risk calculations," admitted Dave Clark, Amazon's head of worldwide consumer operations. "We can't use traditional pressure tactics against workers when municipal government is actively supporting them." Bezos's response revealed the arrogance that would ultimately doom Amazon's strategy. "Then we pressure the mayor until he abandons the workers. Find his vulnerabilities, fund his opponents, make supporting Amazon workers politically costly." The strategy was classic corporate intimidation, but it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Mamdani's political position. Unlike traditional politicians who depended on corporate donations, Mamdani had been elected explicitly to fight billionaire influence. Amazon's pressure tactics would only validate his anti-corporate message. February 16, 2026, Amazon launched a sophisticated public relations offensive designed to isolate Mamdani and undermine worker organizing. The company announced plans to hire 5,000 additional New York workers, while simultaneously suggesting that labor disputes might force them to reconsider expansion plans. Corporate-funded think tanks released studies warning that municipal intervention in labor disputes would drive businesses away from New York. Business groups held press conferences expressing concern about anti-business extremism in city government. Amazon's lobbying team activated their networks of corporate allies, former government officials, and business organizations to pressure Mamdani through economic anxiety and political isolation. The strategy might have worked against traditional politicians, but Mamdani had anticipated corporate counterattacks and prepared accordingly. At 10 a.m., Mamdani held another press conference, this time inside the Amazon warehouse where workers were organizing. Standing among cardboard boxes and conveyor belts, surrounded by workers in Amazon uniforms, he delivered a devastating critique of corporate intimidation tactics. Jeff Bezos thinks he can threaten New York workers with job losses if they dare to organize, Mamdani said, his voice echoing through the warehouse. He thinks he can pressure elected officials with economic blackmail. He's about to learn that working families don't scare easily. Mamdani announced that New York City would actively recruit businesses that respected worker rights to fill any space Amazon might vacate. The city would provide tax incentives for companies that recognized unions, paid living wages, and maintained safe working conditions. "We don't need businesses that exploit workers," Mamdani declared to cheers from assembled Amazon employees. "We need businesses that understand their success depends on treating workers with dignity." The policy reversal was brilliant and devastating. Instead of begging Amazon to stay despite their labor abuses, Mamdani was essentially inviting them to leave, while promising to replace them with better employers. Corporate America was stunned. Mayors were supposed to compete for business investment, not make demands about worker treatment. Mamdani had fundamentally altered the power dynamic between municipal government and corporate employers. February 18, 2026. Amazon workers at all 5 New York facilities began coordinated work slowdowns that cut productivity by 35% while remaining technically legal. The action was designed to demonstrate workers' power without providing grounds for mass firings. Christian Smalls coordinated the campaign from a union office that had become a symbol of worker resistance. The walls were covered with photos of Amazon workers, testimonials about unsafe conditions, and documentation of company retaliation against organizing efforts. "We're not just fighting for Amazon workers," Smalls explained to supporters gathered in the office. "We're fighting for every worker who's been told they don't deserve a voice on the job." The coordinated slowdown was having massive economic impact. Amazon's New York operations handled over $2 billion in annual revenue, and the productivity decline was costing the company millions daily, while demonstrating workers' collective power. Amazon's response was predictably aggressive. The company began disciplinary procedures against slowdown leaders, increased surveillance of worker organizing, and implemented productivity quotas designed to pressure workers into abandoning resistance. But every corporate escalation was met with municipal support that Amazon hadn't anticipated. When Amazon fired 3 slowdown leaders for performance issues, Mamdani's labor department immediately launched wrongful termination investigations. When Amazon increased warehouse surveillance, city inspectors discovered privacy violations that resulted in substantial fines. Most importantly, when Amazon tried to import temporary replacement workers, Mamdani's administration denied the special permits required for large-scale employment changes during active labor disputes. Amazon wants to replace New York workers with out-of-state strikebreakers, Mamdani announced at his daily press briefing. Municipal government will not enable corporate union busting at the expense of our residents' livelihoods. The permit denial was legally innovative and politically brilliant. Mamdani had found a way to prevent Amazon's most effective union-busting tactic while claiming to protect local employment rather than simply supporting worker organizing. Amazon's legal team immediately challenged the permit denial in federal court, but the litigation would take months to resolve. In the meantime, the company faced sustained worker resistance without their primary weapon for breaking strikes. February 22, 2026. Jeff Bezos made a decision that would transform a local labor dispute into a national political crisis. Rather than negotiating with workers or accepting municipal intervention, he chose direct confrontation with Mamdani through economic warfare. Amazon announced the immediate closure of 2 New York facilities, affecting 8,400 workers, with operations transferred to warehouses in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The company claimed the closures were prompted by regulatory hostility and political interference in lawful business operations. The announcement was designed to terrify both workers and government officials. Amazon was demonstrating its willingness to destroy thousands of jobs rather than accept worker organizing or municipal oversight. Bezos personally appeared on CNBC to deliver Amazon's message. When local government interferes with legal business operations, companies have no choice but to protect their operations and shareholders. We hope Mayor Mamdani will reconsider his anti-business positions before more New Yorkers lose their jobs. The economic blackmail was obvious and devastating. Amazon was essentially demanding that Mamdani abandon worker support or face responsibility for mass unemployment in a city already struggling with economic inequality. Traditional politicians might have capitulated to such pressure, but Mamdani understood that yielding to corporate intimidation would only invite further exploitation. His response was swift, decisive, and unprecedented in American municipal politics. At 4 p.m., just 6 hours after Amazon's closure announcement, Mamdani held a press conference that would be remembered as the moment American labor relations fundamentally changed. Jeff Bezos has declared war on New York workers, Mamdani began, standing in front of City Hall with Amazon workers, union leaders, and municipal officials. He thinks he can punish our entire city because workers dare to organize and government dares to support them. Mamdani announced a comprehensive municipal response that went far beyond traditional labor dispute intervention. First, New York City would immediately terminate all contracts with Amazon and Amazon Web Services, worth over $100 million annually. The city would transition to competitors that respected worker rights and municipal authority. Second, the city would provide emergency unemployment benefits, job placement services, and retraining programs for all displaced Amazon workers, funded through a special assessment on corporations that engaged in retaliatory closures. Third, New York would actively recruit unionized competitors to occupy Amazon's facilities, providing tax incentives for companies that recognized worker organizing and paid living wages. Fourth, the city would investigate Amazon for potential violations of labor law, tax obligations, and regulatory requirements, with penalties sufficient to deter future corporate retaliation. Jeff Bezos thinks he can hold our workers hostage, Mamdani declared to thunderous applause from the assembled crowd. He's about to learn that New York City doesn't negotiate with economic terrorists. The language was inflammatory but accurate. Amazon was using job destruction to pressure government policy, which was essentially economic terrorism designed to intimidate democratic opposition to corporate power. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Amazon's stock dropped 5.8% in after-hours trading, as investors recognized that Mamdani's response would encourage similar confrontations nationwide. Corporate America faced the possibility that municipal governments might start supporting workers rather than automatically siding with employers. Labor organizations across the country immediately endorsed Mamdani's response. Mayor Mamdani has shown that democratic government can stand up to corporate bullying, Schuler declared. every working family in America should thank him for proving that billionaires aren't more powerful than democracy. But corporate America was terrified. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Business Roundtable, and dozens of industry associations condemned Mamdani's anti-business extremism and warned of economic consequences for cities that interfered with free enterprise. The corporate panic revealed how dependent American business had become on government neutrality during labor disputes. When municipal officials actually supported workers against corporate exploitation, the entire system of labor relations faced fundamental disruption. February 25, 2026, Amazon's board of directors convened an emergency meeting to address what had become an existential crisis for the company's labor relations strategy. For 28 years, Amazon had successfully prevented worker organizing through intimidation, retaliation, and government complicity. Mamdani's intervention had shattered that model and created precedent that could spread to other cities with progressive governments. Board member Jamie Dimon, CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, outlined the broader implications. If mayors start supporting workers against corporate interests, our entire labor cost structure becomes unsustainable. We need to stop Mamdani before other politicians follow his example. The solution they proposed was characteristically corporate: escalate pressure until Mamdani capitulated or voters replaced him with a more business-friendly mayor. Amazon announced plans to relocate their New York headquarters operations to Virginia, affecting 5,000 high-paying jobs. The company would also suspend all New York investments, cancel planned facility expansions, and terminate vendor relationships with New York businesses. The economic warfare was designed to turn the entire business community against Mamdani by making his worker support economically costly for everyone with corporate relationships. Bezos appeared on Fox Business to personally deliver Amazon's ultimatum. Mayor Mamdani can continue his anti-business crusade, but he'll do it in a city that Amazon no longer calls home. Other companies should consider whether New York's political environment supports their success. The threat was clear: change mayors or lose Amazon permanently, along with all the economic benefits the company provided. But Bezos had misunderstood both Mamdani's political position and New York voters' priorities. The mayor had been elected explicitly to fight corporate power, and Amazon's escalation was validating rather than undermining his central message. Mamdani's response was swift and devastating. Instead of defensive explanations or compromise offerings, he doubled down on confrontation with corporate power. Jeff Bezos thinks he can hold our entire city hostage because we support workers' right to organize, Mamdani said at his emergency press conference. He's threatening to destroy thousands of jobs unless we abandon our values and submit to his wealth. Mamdani announced that New York City would actively support other cities facing similar corporate intimidation. The mayor's office would share strategies for municipal worker support, provide legal assistance for labor-friendly policies, and coordinate responses to corporate retaliation. Amazon's threats prove exactly why we need to break up monopolistic corporations that believe their wealth entitles them to control democratic government, Mamdani declared. Jeff Bezos has accidentally made the case for everything we're fighting for. The jujitsu was brilliant. Rather than defending against Amazon's attacks, Mamdani was using their corporate bullying as evidence for more aggressive action against concentrated corporate power. March 1, 2026. The confrontation entered its most dangerous phase when Amazon began actively campaigning against Mamdani's 2029 re-election through massive spending on local political advertising. Amazon-funded super PACs launched television, radio, and social media campaigns, blaming Mamdani for job losses, economic instability, and business flight from New York. The messaging was sophisticated and focus group tested to exploit voter anxiety about economic consequences. Corporate-funded think tanks released studies projecting that Mamdani's anti-business policies would cost New York 50,000 jobs and $5 billion in economic activity over 4 years. Business leaders appeared at press conferences warning that municipal interference in labor relations would destroy the city's competitiveness. The campaign was remarkably similar to the billionaire conspiracy that had backfired during Mamdani's 2025 election, but Amazon was betting that actual job losses would make voters more receptive to corporate messaging. They were wrong again. Polling showed that 67% of New Yorkers supported Mamdani's confrontation with Amazon, viewing it as defense of worker rights rather than economic extremism. Even more significantly, 78% said they would rather have fewer corporate jobs than accept worker exploitation by billionaire employers. The poll numbers revealed a fundamental shift in American political consciousness. Voters were no longer automatically prioritizing corporate appeasement over worker dignity, especially when corporate threats were obvious and heavy-handed. Mamdani's approval rating actually increased during Amazon's pressure campaign, rising from 72% to 79% as voters rallied around their mayor's resistance to corporate intimidation. Jeff Bezos thinks he can buy our democracy just like he bought our politicians, said Queens resident Maria Santos at a pro-Mamdani rally. He's learning that New Yorkers don't scare easily and don't sell cheaply. March 8, 2026, International Women's Day. Amazon workers organized their largest demonstration yet, with over 15,000 people marching from Amazon facilities to City Hall in support of both worker organizing and municipal resistance to corporate pressure. The march was led by Christian Smalls and a coalition of Amazon workers who had become symbols of labor resistance against corporate exploitation. Their chants echoed through Manhattan: Bezos billionaire, workers everywhere, and New York strong, Amazon wrong. Mamdani spoke to the assembled crowd from the City Hall steps, delivering what would become one of the most important labor speeches in American history. Today we prove that working people united can stand up to the richest man in the world, he declared as the crowd roared approval. Jeff Bezos has spent weeks trying to intimidate us, threaten us, and buy us. He's failed at all three. The mayor outlined the results of Amazon's month-long pressure campaign. Worker organizing had spread to Amazon facilities in 12 other cities. Municipal governments in 6 states had passed worker support resolutions, and federal legislators were introducing bills to prevent corporate retaliation against worker organizing. Amazon's bullying has accidentally created the largest labor movement in decades, Mamdani announced. They tried to stop one union and sparked a national uprising for worker dignity. The speech was broadcast live on C-SPAN, streamed on social media, and covered by international news outlets as a historic moment in American labor relations. Mamdani had successfully reframed Amazon's corporate pressure as validation of worker resistance rather than evidence of economic risk. March 15, 2026. The breakthrough came when Amazon's corporate intimidation finally backfired completely. Federal prosecutors, responding to months of documented corporate retaliation against worker organizing, announced a Department of Justice investigation into Amazon's labor practices under the National Labor Relations Act. The investigation would examine Amazon's closure of New York facilities, retaliation against organizing workers, and threats against municipal government officials who supported labor rights. No corporation, regardless of size or wealth, is above federal labor law, announced U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams. Amazon's response to worker organizing and municipal support raises serious questions about illegal interference with protected labor activities. The federal investigation changed everything. Instead of Amazon pressuring Mamdani, federal prosecutors were now investigating Amazon for the same corporate retaliation that Mamdani had been opposing. Corporate America recognized that Amazon's aggressive tactics had created exactly the precedent they'd hoped to avoid. Federal intervention in corporate labor relations would make union busting far more risky and expensive for all employers. Amazon's stock price fell 8.2% on news of the federal investigation, as investors calculated the potential costs of legal penalties, regulatory oversight, and precedent-setting labor protections. March 22, 2026. Facing federal investigation, worker organizing in multiple states, and political pressure from shareholders concerned about Amazon's confrontational approach, Jeff Bezos made a decision that would be studied in business schools for decades. Amazon announced a comprehensive settlement with New York workers that included union recognition, wage increases averaging 23%, improved safety conditions, and commitments to respect worker organizing without retaliation. The company also agreed to reopen closed New York facilities, restore terminated workers with back pay, and establish labor relations procedures that prevented future conflicts over organizing activities. Most significantly, Amazon acknowledged that municipal governments had legitimate authority to support worker organizing and pledged to respect local political processes rather than engaging in economic intimidation. Amazon recognizes that our success depends on productive relationships with workers and the communities where we operate. Read the carefully worded statement that marked Bezos' surrender to organized labor and municipal authority. The settlement was a complete victory for everything Mamdani and the workers had fought for. Amazon had been forced to accept precisely the union recognition, wage improvements, and governmental oversight they had spent months trying to prevent. Christian Smalls, standing beside Mamdani at the settlement announcement, captured the historic significance. We proved that when workers and government unite, even Jeff Bezos has to respect our power. The victory sent shockwaves through corporate America. if Amazon, the company most successful at preventing worker organizing, could be forced to accept unionization through coordinated worker and government pressure, no corporation was safe from similar campaigns. Labor organizers across the country immediately began adapting the New York model of municipal support for worker organizing. Progressive mayors in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Philadelphia announced similar policies supporting worker rights against corporate retaliation. The Amazon warehouse war had become the template for successful labor organizing in the 21st century, workers and democratic government cooperating against corporate exploitation. April 1, 2026. 1 month after Amazon's surrender, Mamdani reflected on the confrontation during his State of the City address. The speech was delivered at the Amazon warehouse where the organizing campaign had begun, symbolically demonstrating that workers rather than corporate executives now controlled the narrative. 47 days ago, Jeff Bezos thought his wealth entitled him to exploit workers and intimidate government, Mamdani said to an audience of Amazon workers, union leaders, and municipal officials. Today, those workers have a union contract, living wages, and dignity on the job. The mayor outlined lessons from Amazon's defeat that would guide future labor relations. Municipal government must support workers against corporate exploitation. Economic intimidation should strengthen rather than weaken democratic resolve, and worker organizing combined with political support could defeat even the most powerful corporations. We've proven that democracy is stronger than money, that solidarity is more powerful than wealth, and that when working people unite, billionaires lose, Mamdani declared to sustained applause. The Amazon victory had established Mamdani as the most important labor ally in American politics and demonstrated that progressive municipal government could successfully challenge corporate power through coordinated resistance. Jeff Bezos, watching the speech from his Seattle office, understood that his confrontation with Mamdani had fundamentally altered American labor relations. Corporate intimidation tactics that had worked for decades were now politically radioactive and legally risky. The billionaire who had never lost a labor fight had been defeated by a 35-year-old mayor and 15,000 warehouse workers who refused to be intimidated by wealth and power. 6 months later, Amazon workers in 17 states had successfully organized unions using strategies developed during the New York warehouse war. Corporate spending on union-busting consultants had declined 40% as companies recognized that aggressive anti-labor tactics now risked municipal government intervention and federal prosecution. Most importantly, the Amazon victory had proved that American workers could still win against corporate exploitation when they had political allies willing to risk corporate retaliation for labor justice. The warehouse war was over. Democracy and dignity had triumphed over wealth and intimidation. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against corporate exploitation is municipal government that understands whose side it should be on. Jeff Bezos learned that lesson the hard way, and American workers were stronger for his education.